Can you believe that this is the 6th year of the Inspire Health podcast? It's unbelievable. 233 episodes later and 11 series, here we are. And I want to thank all of you for joining us on this adventure. This has been my absolute favorite classroom for learning over the past several years. And when Taya started to join me too a couple of years ago, I know she's really enjoyed this, even though this was stepping well outside of her comfort zone around speaking publicly with other people. So when I started the podcast almost 6 years ago, my goal of it was really to invite you to join me on my own exploration and curiosity. I was well aware of lots of different areas in natural health, and it's been a passion of mine for a long time. And I loved the idea that I get to actually have conversations with people that I admired or I wanted to learn more from, or new things that I didn't know too much about, but I thought sounded really interesting. And holy cow, have we expanded and learned. I mean, we've gone well outside of the box of even alternative healthcare. We've looked at the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, the metaphysical, and even beyond, because I really feel like if we're going to talk about health, we need to explore all of it. How do we show up in this world? And our goal really with this podcast has been to make them completely accessible as much as possible and to normalize some of these conversations because these aren't the normal conversations you hear most of the time. And the more that we're able to share the voice from these other people and get it out and have these conversations that you might not hear very much, or even conversations that are being squashed and censored, the more that we're able to share this type of information, we normalize it. We create a blueprint for what might be possible. And at the heart of it, that's really why we do it. We feel that this is important for the world, not just us individually, but as each individual expands and learns and grows and applies some of this information, we are creating the world anew. We're the ones taking part in creating what we think is possible. And so without these types of conversations, I think we limit what we think is possible. And so especially in this last series on creating new earth, that's the idea is like I think people are really getting fed up with the way things are in many ways, but it's like, how do we actually create something different? And we feel that sharing these types of conversations is one of the best way to do that. And if you've followed us for a while, we've done lots of different things, not just the podcast, but we've also done live discussions, we've done live experiences, we've had roundtable discussions, we've played with it in different ways because it's been a real fun for us to collaborate with all of these different people, and many of who've become quite good friends with us now. And that in itself has been another joy of running this whole platform. We've been running it as best as we can, and make no mistake, it is quite costly to run a platform like this, not just financially, but also just time and energy. And when you're managing it with kids and family and all the different things that all of us are usually trying to manage in our lives, we've still been doing the best we can to try and get it out in as many ways as possible and normalize these messages. And we are entering new times. I mean, we're in a time where there's an ever increasing amount of censorship on natural health and particularly on natural health practitioners. And as I've mentioned in the past and talked about in other episodes, some of the different bills that have gone through here in Canada that are not only making it hard to say certain information, but even there's a lot of consequences potentially to it for health practitioners. So we've personally made lots of different changes around that. And we are moving into a time where we are needing to transition the way that we are offering the podcast as well as any of our other services, whether that's consultations, that's access to courses, retreats, workshops, all of that stuff. We are basically changing everything coming up in the next little bit. Tay and I have one more episode after this one that we're going to do together. I think that'll come out on February 15th, where her and I will do one more episode that's going to be available to everybody. After that, we are moving everything into a new platform called Inspire Life Private Member Association, and that will be able to be accessed at inspirelife.earth. That's inspirelife.earth. We'll put a link at the bottom, and I'm hoping that that will be active by the time you guys listen to this episode. If not, it should be very soon at that point, but you can check that out. And everything is going to be moved into the private sector. So we're going to be able to add in other benefits to members. We're actually going to have once a month, we're going to do an episode that is specifically geared to what members want to hear. You get to write in your questions, and then we will do an episode fielding your questions. We're going to have a lot of different fun things that I think we're going to be able to do more exclusively with the members. So You'll be able to go to inspirelife.earth, and then from there, you'll be able to sign up as a member, and then you'll be able to have access to everything. And that's going to include the podcast will be there, consultation services will be there, the retreats and the healing immersions, as well as the courses and the books and all of that kind of stuff will all be in there once you are able to become a member, and then you'll be able to come in to access all of those offerings a la carte. This is a huge transition for Tay and I, and something that we have been looking into for a little while and trying to figure out how to actually put it together and make it work. And I think we are just about there. So we hope to see all of you on the other side, and we look forward to being able to still bring you some amazing content and life-changing information that I know has been incredibly impactful for ourselves and for many of you. I thank all of you for writing in and sharing with us your stories. And it really does fill Tan up completely when we hear an episode that really landed for one of you and opened up doors that maybe you didn't think were there prior to that, or episodes that really help to shine a light on improving your health or the health of a loved one. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, and it lets us know that the information that we are creating is landing and that it's still of benefit, and we're going to continue to do that in the best way that we can. The only thing now is that it's going to be under a private member association. So you guys will just have to log in to join us there so that it is secure and safe, and that we can have a much more candid conversation and dialogue with all of you. So thank you so much for joining us over these past 6 years, and we are excited for what comes next, and we hope to see you on the other side. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And we have brought back a good friend of ours, Dr. Ken Harris, again to chat with us about his newest book. And we're going to get into that in just a moment. But we've had Ken on the show, I think maybe 3 times, 4 times now. Always a pleasure. I really find like our audience really enjoys these conversations. Ken is an absolutely a master storyteller. So I love handing the reins over to Ken and let him just go because he's got so much history, so much wisdom, and always a pleasure to chat with. Ken is a chiropractor, an educator, a lecturer, and an author, and he's absolutely a pioneer in holistic healing. We've spoken to Ken before. He was the author of the book Synchronicity, the Magic, the Mystery, and the Meaning. And that's basically a blueprint for understanding the hidden meaning of your own synchronicities. And I think that was the first time we chatted, Ken, was we actually talked about synchronicities. And that was probably a couple of years back or so. And now your most recent book, Second Chances from Surviving to Thriving. And I know Tay and I went through that book a little bit and wrote up a little something for it because it's a really beautiful book. And I think an absolutely very timely book for the world at this time. So Ken, welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here, Jason. Always a joy to see you and your beautiful wife. Unfortunately, she's not on.
I know, unfortunately.
Yeah, she's not going to be on the screen today, but I was hoping. But anyway, it's all good. Happy to see you.
We'll have to do like just a private chat again later, and you can see her. But yes, Tay is not able to join me today. So Ken, I'd love to jump into your book, and I just wanted to start by reading the preface for it because it's really beautiful, and like I said, I think it's incredibly timely. And then I'm going to pass it over to you to share your experience with it. But it says here, and this is a quote by Jean Shinoda Bolen: "Nobody gets through life without a degree of suffering or betrayal or illness or loss. The question is, every time that dark quality comes into our lives, what do we do? How do we respond? What have we learned? How can we grow through this?" And it says, each of the following stories is about someone who chose not to let adversities define the rest of their life. From illness to life-threatening accidents to the loss of loved ones in a terrorist attack, each true story shares the author's journey of overcoming great adversity and in many cases facing possible death. We live and move in an ocean of uncertainty. No one is immune from the changes that life often brings suddenly and unexpectedly, no matter one's place in the socioeconomic spectrum. I'm sure you've heard the expression, life can turn on a dime. The stories in this book truly reflect that. So, Ken, I'm going to pass it over to you. How did you end up getting involved in this book? And this book is essentially a collection of beautiful stories from people that have really had second chances, correct?
Absolutely, from all over the world, from Japan to Australia to South Africa to Mexico and all across the United States. I was privileged to meet each and every one of the authors.
Oh, that's wonderful. And how did you get involved in the book, and maybe share a little bit about it and your experience in what your story was related to this book?
Well, I believe you're asking me the why. Why did second chances come into being this? Is that correct?
Yeah, I want to hear
Well, the
your
why?
second chance.
Yeah, well, the why for me was a life-threatening situation. I had a cardiac event 4 years ago, 4 years and a week, actually, in which case I left my body. I had an out-of-body experience, and I was told by my higher self, my soul self, some people say God, if God is within all of us, then God was speaking to me, and God said, "Hey, Ken, you're not going to die today. Go back and finish. You're not complete with your mission, and write a book about your second chances." And here I am. So I came back into consciousness, and through a series of divine, I have to say it was divine orchestration, divine outworkings. My life was literally saved. Anyone else, the doctor told me, would what I experienced would have died on the beach. I was walking on the beach. I couldn't keep up with my wife. I said, "We got to go back to the condo, make me something to eat. It feels like my blood sugar is dropped. I'm shaky." She gave me a sandwich. I took one bite. Now, ladies, if any ladies are listening to this, I now know experientially what it feels like to have a hot flash because every pore of my body was pouring out sweat, followed immediately by nausea to the point where I could have projectile vomited across the room. And then, ladies and gentlemen, the most awful pain I've ever had in my entire life. And I've had some bad pains with kidney stones and so on, but it felt like someone took a knife, was stabbing me simultaneously in my chest, right in the center of my chest, right through my back. And I couldn't breathe. And I took one look at my beautiful wife at that time of 54 years, and all I could utter to her was 911. And I collapsed. When I regained consciousness and they were wheeling me out to the ambulance, my parting words to Judy was, "I just want you to know one thing, Judy. I have loved you my entire life. I never thought I'd see her again. I really didn't believe I would make it to the ER." Anyway, the events worked out. Everything lined up perfectly. So the chapter in this book for me was Extra Innings, a reprieve from sudden death, how synchronicity saved my life. And the stories in this book are compelling. I mean, mine was one of near death, but there were so many others. There's 22 other stories of the most horrible things that have happened to people. But as you said read in the preface, which I wrote, everyone chose not to stay a victim. They made a conscious decision to go through the storms of life, through PTSD, come out the other side with post-traumatic growth. And the book offers strategies and ways to cope if you're facing something horrible. At the end of every chapter, every author gives you tools and strategies because we know people are hurting all around the world. This book basically is a supermarket. There's something in this book for everybody. There's no, anyone picking up this book is going to relate to one or more of the stories. And notice it said second chances, S, because we've all had more than one.
Ken, how did that make an impact on your life specifically? Because I know, I mean, you've been on a path of healing and helping people, and I've always known you to be a really appreciative and full of gratitude kind of a person. But going through this, at this point in your life, after living a certain way, how did that impact you specifically? Like, what changed for you after going through that?
Well, I think I got rewired to tell you the truth. And that was one thing. There was a gift. There was a silver lining to my cardiac event. And this is what it was, folks. I have been teaching mind-body medicine, mind-body healing, not medicine, excuse me, healing for 45 years. And I always would tell people, you're not your body, you're not your mind, you're not your feelings, you're the witnessing presence. Well, I had a direct experiential of my witnessing presence, of my true self, which at that point eradicated any and all fear or doubts I may have had relative to death, relative to that maybe this is all a lot of baloney, and when you die you're dead and it's oblivion. That lived in the back of my mind like 1% maybe. It's gone. I know for a fact it's not the way it works. We go on a journey. Consciousness, whatever that is to you, spirit is not skin encapsulated. Our bodies are inside of our souls. It's not our souls inside of our body. So for that, takeaway for me was a wonderful thing that I can look at someone and say, well, I know you're going to lose your physical body, but that's not who you are. So no need to be fretting. No need to be in fear.
It's a pretty wild thing, you know. It's like we were talking about this just before we actually started to record, but it was around the idea that you can know intellectually, you know, you can know a lot of things, and I think really have a strong belief behind them, but there's something that switches when you have that direct experience. For people that haven't had a direct experience, how do they how do they start to really step into the knowing of that without having to have a heart attack or a near death experience? I mean, what are the ways that people can, because a lot of this comes down to this, you know, these are unknowns. These are, we don't know what happens unless you actually been there. And we did a whole series on life, death, and beyond and talked to people. You are part of that series too, with what happens when you cross over. But how do people anchor in on a certain level of faith and trust in the process when they haven't had that direct experience?
Well, there's no substitute for direct experience, Jason. They're going to have to borrow your faith and trust at that point. It's going to have to be if they respect you and they know you're a solid citizen and you've been there and you have integrity and you're honest, they're going to have to temporarily borrow it until they have their own experience. There's no other way to do it. I mean, there's no words to describe it. The presence of the one who dwells in you and me is the same presence, by the way. There's only, this is the joke, I think, when people realize when you drop your body, you're going to realize it was never you to begin with. There is really no you. We're all part of the one oversoul, God. I'll call that God. And you know that one spirit is differentiated in 8 billion life forms and in millions of other life forms, from the animals to the fish to the insects to the. We are in fact life itself, temporarily having a human experience, but our true identity is life itself. We are the creator beings.
You know, I haven't had a near death experience myself, but one thing that I've found has helped me to step more into a faith around this is, I mean, for me, it's just been different practices. I think with people, whether it's been meditation or yoga or whatever you want to do, if you can get to a certain place and I also find nature. Right now, I really crave time in nature. I feel like I'm able to connect that much deeper to that. But I remember the first time I had an experience where it felt like I just knew I was in a different space. And I saw the world very differently. And it was funny. I wasn't meditating. I wasn't doing anything. I was actually reading one of Don Miguel Ruiz's books, The Mastery of Love. And I'm reading that, and something clicked at some point. And I remember I was working part-time at a gym in a community center, and I was reading this book as I'm sort of monitoring the weight room, and I got something just flash, and it felt like I was catapulted into this completely different perspective. And it was absolutely a feeling of unconditional love, as best as I could probably understand it at that point in time. And I remember I had a smile from ear to ear, and I remember walking down the street when I was done, looking at everybody, and it was like I'm looking in their eyes, and I was seeing who everybody was. And I'm sure they probably thought I was bizarre, just staring with this big smile. But everybody else was smiling back as I'm doing it. So I guess it wasn't too spooky for people, but it was that experience. That was the first time I really had a moment where I stepped into something that was well outside of what I had ever experienced before. It was short, it was fleeting, and then I kind of went back down and everything, you know, the colors kind of dimmed a little bit and everything, but I knew it was there. And you can't get back when you've seen it at least once.
You can't unknow it. You can't unknow it. You had a glimpse of unified fields. I
Hmm.
would describe that. You opened the door, you took a quick look, and you shut it again. But you tasted it. You know it exists, and no one can talk you in or out of that. So again, for those of you on the path, meditation's wonderful, yoga's wonderful. You begin to understand that you're nothing but the witnessing presence. That's who we are. Ram Dass said it beautifully. I am witnessing presence, and that's who we are. And the truth of the matter is, there really is only one presence, and we're all part of that one presence. You know, on
Hmm.
my website, it says we're here to awaken humanity from the illusion of separation to the reality of oneness. I had a oneness experience. You sound like you tasted it for a moment. And there's nothing to worry about, folks. Just relax, enjoy the ride. We're here to, my attitude is the only prime mission is to give and receive love. That's all here. Everything else, Mickey Mouse. It's all drama. We're here for the giving and the receiving of love. That's why we incarnated. And if you want to read a great book, Anita Moorjani's book on dying to be me, do you know who Anita Moorjani is, Dr.
Yeah.
Jason? Yeah, and she talks about very great metaphor. She says in waking consciousness, we have like a minus cap on the top of our head. In the Jewish religion, they wear those things, they daven, there's a little light. But when she went into the field and she went into this other space, other place, the whole thing got illuminated all at once. You didn't just see one corner of it, you saw the whole totality of it all. And so that's a good thing to know. And what's going on the earth today is primarily because people, mankind, humankind, male and female created, we us, forgot this. We forgot that we're all unifiedly connected in the field. That's why synchronicity happens, by the way. That's not an accident. We draw into ourselves like frequencies. I have them every day. I laugh. And every time I meet someone, I say to myself, what am I going to learn about myself today by meeting this so-called stranger who's really my friend already? That's my attitude. There are no strangers.
I love it, Ken. And I totally agree. I think that as people have this experience, like we're talking about, and you can't help but notice. I mean, that was what it felt like. It was this oneness. When I was walking down the street, it was like I was looking at people, but there was no separation between it. It was like loving them was loving myself. It was just one big interconnected thing. And I feel like when people are able to tether away from the distractions, I think, that get in the way from being able to have some of those experiences, maybe. And I think even like a desire to want to know. I know for me, I've had a desire to want to understand the underlying truth to these things. Because when you have that experience, and if more and more people have something like that, it makes no sense as to why you hurt each other. It just really doesn't. You realize that you're just doing it to yourself, and it's all one big circle. So
War would become obsolete. We would no longer
absolutely,
war on each other.
yeah,
Absolutely,
absolutely.
100% true. And that's my only hope. That's why I'm in the world teaching what I do, and that people wake up to the reality, what you just said. There is really only one of us. It's a reflection. So why would I want to harm myself? The old, I think it was in kindergarten, do unto others as they do unto you, or someplace it said that. And that's the truth of the matter is by loving you, I'm loving me. By hurting you, I'm hurting me. And when we
Hmm.
get that, there's hope. Other than that, I don't see much hope. It ain't going to happen politically. Politically, we are now the United Divided States of America. Forget about it. And so politics is never going to be the solution to what we're talking about. There is a spiritual evolution in government already in place. And when we wake up to that, there'll be no more conflict. There'll be
Hmm.
no more conflict.
Yeah. Ken, when you were going through the book, was there any specific stories that really landed for you particularly?
Yes, many, many. It's hard to choose, but there were several. I'll speak about two of them. I've spoken on another podcast. This woman calls me up. Her name is Kia Sher. I don't know Kia from Shinola. I don't know who she is. And she said, I heard you on another podcast, Dr. Ken, and you wrote a book on synchronicity. And I would like to interview on my podcast. I said, okay, let's do it. So she calls me up, gives me the link. And I see in the back of her, behind her, is this thing called the Synchronicity Retreat Center. I said, excuse me, did you put that sign up for this lecture we're going to have? No, no, that's where I'm calling you from. There's the Synchronicity Retreat Center in Faber, Virginia. I couldn't believe it. I said, oh, it's pretty synchronistic that you're going to interview me. Bottom line is her backstory. She's a beautiful soul. She was a temporary director at the time I spoke with her. I said, how did that happen? How did you get to that position? And then here's the backstory of Kia, who I love dearly. She said, well, Ken, my husband was the director, and my 13-year-old daughter and my husband were, along with members of our community, were hired by the Indian government to come to India in 2008 in the city of Mumbai. They were there to teach them a new form of synchronization sound meditation that we teach. Unfortunately, the Pakistani terrorists came in the day they arrived and killed them all. So she lost her husband and she lost a 13-year-old daughter. Well, I mean, that alone, the loss of your spouse and your child like that is horrific. And she chose, here's what impressed me. She chose sometime later to get on a plane, fly to India and run peace conferences for the people who killed her family. And I said, I almost cried thinking about it. I said, Kia, that's a high bar. That's Christ-like. I'm not that evolved. When you tell me this story, my first flush, my ego flush was I would have gotten on a plane with an AK-47 and wanted to go there and kill them, not to offer healing to them. So that story just rendered me. And she's just she wrote a book called Pocket Full of Peace, and she's teaching peace seminars all around the world. She's in another book called Forgiving the Unforgivable. So that story, really rendered me when I heard. I cried internally when she was speaking to me. I couldn't believe it. Another story of loss was my good friend Bobby Deneen. Bobby Deneen was a power company guy. He was a big uh, manager of a whole cadre, a company of men who go out in the middle of storms and they restore the power lines. But his friend asked him if he would just do him a favor and take down a tree. So that's no big deal. He climbs towers, so he goes up the tree, but he climbs the tree, and 24 feet up, as he's working on a tree, it collapses and he falls 24 feet onto the ground, onto his face, loses all his teeth, fractures all his facial bones, lacerates his aorta, spleen, liver, you name it. They gave him last rites 3 times in the hospital, and he survived. Not only did he survive, he came out stronger than he ever went in. He's one of the most gracious, loving, giving people I know. I met him. I was up in Captiva Island at a place called Key Lime Bistro. He was sitting like 5 feet from me, had a t-shirt on with something on it. He turns around, he smiles at me. And here's what I said. Do you know you got $1 million smile? And you know what he said to me? Hey, Ken, that's what it cost me. I said, what do you mean? It cost you? You spent the day. And then he tells him the story. So his story is one of overcoming, never giving up. He could have given up multiple times, but he didn't come back out as a victim. He's in a community where he helps everyone, everybody, and he's the only one in the book, except one other, who had nothing to gain by being in the book. All the other people in the book are healers and teachers and coaches. He just I want to be in a book to share my story to encourage people because there was no remuneration for him coming back. That's the kind of guy he is. And I could go on and on and on, but the stories are, as they say, captivating and they'll make you're going to read this book. You can't read it cover to cover. You have to read a chapter at a time because it's emotionally evocative. But as again, it's not a negative book. At the end of every chapter, there's strategies and tools to help people reading it how to get through some of this stuff. Because most people would not be able to come back. They would go down the tubes after these kinds of losses. And none of the authors in this book did.
Well, that's what I think is so powerful about stories like that. It's I mean, even that one just like almost moves me to tears too when I think about that. Like, and it's the loss is sad, but the part that moves me more to tears is like what it would have even taken to put yourself into a place where you go and do peace conferences for those that killed your family. I mean, I'm not there right at the moment. I don't know what that would be like. Honestly, you don't think you know unless you're there. We just talked to Neil Donald Walsh, author of Conversations with God, and he went through his story and around that. I really do feel like if we are here and we're not gone yet, there is something we are still here to do. And when you hear these types of stories, I don't know, for me, they sometimes even simplify things a little bit. Sometimes what I get wrapped up in my own challenges and my own sort of struggles, and which we all have. I mean, everybody has their own variety, their own flavor of struggles, but sometimes you hear things like this and it's just, and it's not to demean them. It doesn't mean that my struggles are less. My struggles are my struggles, but it gives me, it feels like it opens things up and expands me where I can access more capacity within myself to deal with these things because I've seen other people do it. It's almost like that's been put out on the universal field or the unified field. And like that template is there for me to tap into to be able to then access myself.
Beautifully articulated and absolutely true what you just said. Uh, you know, A2 Brute, if they can do it, maybe I can do it. The 4 minute mile deal.
Yeah.
Another one of the stories is my good friend, the vice president of Life University, Dr. Lamash, and he was told he had 2 months to live. They told him he needed to do a double lung and heart transplant. He had a condition that caused the heart to swell so big, it became cardiomyopathy, so big in his chest that he couldn't breathe. He couldn't walk from here to the corner. And had he not gone in for an evaluation, he probably would have died. But once he realized that, he made a decision and he refused the surgery. They wanted to do, that surgery's double lung and heart. And he sought totally holistic means. He's a chiropractor, got under regular care, nutrition, et cetera, et cetera, and totally reversed the illness. Totally. Where now he just won 9 gold medals in the adult Olympics that he's running. So I'm laughing. He went from a death sentence to that. And so again, he made a choice. He dug down deep. He called his children together. He was ready to say goodbye to them. He told them how, he laid out the plans, the funeral, this and that. And then one day, and from that point on, he woke up in the middle of the night and said, I don't have to die. I can beat this. And he did. And I might say all with natural means.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
could go on and on. I don't want to tell you all the stories, but let me
No,
tell you,
and
that's
and
an
it's
example.
yeah, and they're the kind of stories you want to actually sit and read on your own because you go through a bit of an emotional journey with it, but at the end of it, I like I said, I think you just keep expanding more and more. I mean, part of these things and why I think this is I remember us talking about this once before, but I think the Buddha actually said the next Buddha is going to be Sangha. It's community. And there's not going to be one specific enlightened teacher that's coming to sort of save everybody or fix everybody. It's like we're all stepping into that ourselves. And then we're through, I think, conversation and sharing, we're actually all supporting and we're all raising up together.
I would
And
say that's accurate. I would say 1000%. It's Christ consciousness. It's the consciousness of the light. Not religiously Christ, but Christ consciousness. And it is not one person, it's a collective now. I created community around this book. We meet once a month, the 23 authors on Zoom. And we're going to do seminars and workshops and television and radio. We're going to do it all. I already envision us being on a panel discussion on TV and Tell Us Your Second Chance. It's a wonderful thing. And what we can do together, Dr. Jason, we could never do alone.
mhm.
It is collective in energy now. And I'm so delighted. They came to Atlanta, the authors, and we launched the book there. They came from all over the world to be in Atlanta, and we launched the book. There's a love fest going on amongst the authors now.
Yeah, I can feel it from you. And I think the other thing that happens when you read stories like this, and when we have our own personal experiences, I think, of these types of trials and tribulations, it's like there's a point where I feel like you drop to your knees and there's a surrender that takes place. And that's where I think when you talk about this second chance, I think that second chance is also it's embodying a totally new set of information than where we were often living from before. Because in that surrender, and as we had talked about even before, was around this connection to our soul self. So we get informed from a different place than often we were being informed prior to that. What are your thoughts around that?
Oh, there's a line of demarcation. There's a line. You go over a line, you never can go back. And I love it. Surrender, trust, and allow. Surrender to life. Okay. Trust life is intelligent. It knows what it's doing, and allow it to work out. Get the ego out of the way. My life was saved by no conscious efforts on my own. It was amazing how the right guys showed up at the right time, took me to the right hospital, the right procedure, blah, 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 blah. Could have never been orchestrated. Listen to me. When you have a heart attack like I had, you're in total surrender. I was baby-like. I mean, I was helpless. I knew that. And I knew when the doctor said to me, Dr. Ken, if you don't let me do this right away, you're going to die on this table. And I knew she knew that she meant it. And I trusted. I knew the tone of her voice. And I just said, go for it. Because they got to get your permission if you're conscious. I was in and out of consciousness, but I was conscious enough to scribble, go. And they put the stents in me. And it was miraculous. I mean, I walked out the next day. It's like I never happened. I had 100% blockage in my RCA artery, but they opened the proximal and distal, and the blood flowed, and I was fine. And I
This,
didn't have any heart damage, thank God. I mean, most people come back from the cardiac event like that, they're crippled. They,
yeah.
they can't walk a block. So I wake up in total thankfulness every morning of my life since that point. I don't complain about anyone or anything anymore. I used to be a little bit of complainer. Like today we had lunch, I'm laughing. The food was horrible. But I just hope it's not our last meal. And so on the way out, the lady says to me, did you enjoy your meal? I said, yeah, it was pretty good. I don't want to give a laundry list.
Do you know what's funny? It's because you hear these different messages come through, and whenever I hear them coming through from different people in different ways, I always feel like those are the nuggets that we there's a lot of truth behind those, and because we had just interviewed Neil Donald Walsh, and his episode was out prior to this one, so he's fresh in my mind around stuff. But I know in our conversation, when I was asking him some different ways to really navigate this world and to be able to do it with a lot more grace. And his main thing was around really get to a place because he talked about what it was like to live from a place of pure love. And from his perspective on that was when you arrive at a place where you no longer need anything from anybody. That's a pretty liberating place. And I would encourage everybody just to even go through your life for a moment and just think about where do I have these needs, because as soon as we've got needs, then we've created conditions on how that needs to show up. Like, like you going to have your dinner. If you had strong needs that had to be a certain way, it's going to trigger a whole array of different things for you. But because you didn't have that tethering to it, you were able to have a different experience, which was almost humorous, right? And then
It is. It
you're
is.
informed by it. So it's like, okay, I probably won't go to that restaurant again next time.
Yeah, what's
Not
the
not the
big
end of the
deal?
world.
Yeah, what's the expectation realization? This is where people live in the gap. They have this great expectation and realizations down here, and they start complaining. But no, you're right. Go in open, go in up. And when in doubt, be thankful. When you don't know what to do next, just be thankful for being alive. That's how I frame it. Whenever anything happens, I've had a few situations, and I thought in the past I would have been crazy, man. Now I just laugh. I just laugh. I say,
Yeah.
it's big. What's the big minor inconvenience? I say, minor inconvenience. Really?
Even when you talk about gratitude, and I know there's been lots of work on gratitude, and myself and a friend of mine wrote a book on gratitude years back called Letters That Move the World, Intentional Acts of Gratitude. It was the whole idea of creating actually a movement where people are experiencing gratitude. They're writing letters to people and sending them all within a certain period of time to see if there could be like a shift in consciousness. But the real magic happens in the person that's experiencing it. And why I think that's so powerful, kind of like what we talked about before, where when you genuinely connect deeply to that feeling of gratitude, you again get catapulted into a higher level of consciousness and you just see the world differently. It could be the exact same things going on, but you just see your life differently. So it doesn't mean the outside world has to change everything. You see it differently. So
Yeah,
your
yeah.
world changes because you're not seeing it the same way.
Perception. We all wear different glasses. We can look at the so-called same. I don't believe there's an external reality. I think everything is fractal. And we see it through the what color glasses, red pill, blue pill, that
Yeah.
stuff. And so you have a choice. And that's the beautiful thing. That's the only power we really have is the power to choose.
Hmm.
The ego thinks it's in control. And the Buddha's laughing under the tree because it says, hey, you guys thought you were in control. You were never in control. That people live in this fear of controlling. The more controlling someone is, the more fearful they are. That much I can tell you. And the more angry someone is, the more grief they're experiencing in their life. That's a call for love. When someone's angry, that underneath that froth of that anger is sadness and loss. And we all experience it. We're human hyphen beings. And we go back and forth. I tend to live more on the beingness side now than the human. But listen, I'm still a human. I told you I fell and I broke my tailbone, and I'm laughing about it. I'm sitting on ladies and gentlemen, I went to the restaurant today. I bought in a donut, and they all said, "Oh, you have hemorrhoids?" I said, "No, no, no. My wife pushed me, and I fell and broke my tailbone." But in the past, I probably would have stayed home, not even gone out, and been ashamed. I'm carrying a donut. It's all good.
Your wife of recently 55 years of marriage, I think you just posted.
Yeah, well, last week we were 55 years in wedded bliss. No, listen, ladies and gentlemen, we've had our ups and downs. We've had some speed bumps along the way, but we worked it out. And we're living in détente now. And we laugh a lot now. Whereas before, we used to have a little bit of disagreements going on. Now we do a lot of laughing, which is the best medicine, by the way. It's
Yeah,
really good to laugh. And laugh at
absolutely.
yourself. Don't take yourself so seriously. I was always a pretty serious guy. Now it's a joke. I say, oh, isn't that interesting? But when I still get triggered, let me be honest, I get triggered, but I don't stay in default long. If someone says it does something that had a past history with me, and I can reset quick. Whereas in the past, it'd be weeks sometimes before I could get over it.
Yeah. To me, that's the litmus strip. Like that's the litmus test. I feel like when stuff comes up, I don't think we're supposed to not feel things. I think all of the stuff we feel is often just information and advising us in different ways. But it's like the first and the second arrow the Buddha talked about. Life has a certain degree of suffering. Someone dies, you lose a job, your relationship breaks up. There's a certain level of pain and potentially suffering, but it's the second arrow that we keep shooting ourselves with, where we ruminate and lament and go over it and over and over. That's where we really run into troubles. And then I think that's where we see our life keeps playing out in similar ways too.
Well, you're right. My friend is a horse chiropractor, and he says the horses don't have a story in their head. I only have to adjust them once or twice. They don't have to come
Yeah.
3 times a week for the next 6 months. Because and children too. I had many children when I practiced. They got quick, so they didn't talk themselves into why they were supposed to be sick.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true what you just said. I mean, I feel like I feel like I'm talking to myself or hearing myself talk back to me. But you're articulating it beautifully. Let me just read this one thing that one of the authors read because I want people to know this. And she wrote, "In the darkest moments of our lives, when hope seems elusive and the weight of our struggles feels insurmountable, we often yearn for a glimmer of light, a second chance to rewrite our stories. If you find yourself navigating the shadows, I want you to know you're not alone. Life's journey can be tumultuous, but within its twists and its turns, there are profound lessons waiting to be unearthed, and there is hope. There is always hope."
I think probably a lot of people need to hear that right at the moment.
You're not alone, and it'll turn on a dime. Just the way it went negative, it can come back positive. And to stay open to allow, well, as I say, trust life, allow it to work out. Don't get stuck in your stuff. Don't drag the past into the present and ruin your future. Period. That's the truth. That's what we have baggage. We have a lot of baggage behind us in the shadow of ourselves. And we have all these justifications of why they did this and I shouldn't talk to that one. It's all nonsense.
Yeah. Ken, how do you, when people are stuck in that, what are some of the ways, like even yourself, when you've in the past been stuck in some of that stuff, what have been some of the ways that have helped you to navigate out of it, like to get out of that stickiness of the interrelationships and the ego mind identity that gets trapped in these cycles? How did you help? What helped you to move out of that to connect more to that deeper truth, that soul self?
Well, I had a really 2 hour morning practice for many, many decades where I meditated, journaled, walked in nature. You mentioned nature. Nature gets you out of yourself. It takes that
Mhm.
story and say, hey, the biggest show going on here to me. So I listened to music, some instrumental and some, I like the Bhakti yoga, some music with a message. My friend Bob Simer is an incredible singer-songwriter and his music always has a message. So I exposed myself all along to those practices. I don't wait for the crisis.
Mhm.
No, I can honestly say I'm giddy now. I wake up giddy. You know what that feels every day? Like I wake up and yeah, okay. So here's what I'm going to share with you. I think I did this on another podcast. After I take care of my hygiene, I look in the mirror every morning, and it took me a long time to be able to do this. And I lean into that mirror, look in my own eyes, and I say, "Good morning, Kenny. Do you know you're a magnificent being? And I love you." And I hug myself. I give what most people want from others, I give it to myself. From the soul sense to the persona. That's not narcissism. This is the soul talking to Kenny. And man, I'll tell you, I'm good the rest of the day. I'm off the hook. I don't have to get my wife to come in. She won't tell me. She loves me. I know it by acts of service on the 5 love languages, but she's never woke up and tell me, "Good morning, honey, I love you." That's what I do to her. So it's all good. I learned from Harville Hendricks and the imago therapy we did at one point. Give it to yourself. That what you seek from others, give to yourself.
Yeah. Well, I remember even what was his name? John Gray, author of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. I think he actually said one time too, if you expect more than, I think it was like 10% from your partner, you're going to start to run into problems. Like 10% of your happiness more than that from your partner, you're going to run into troubles. And again, that some of those little statements like that have gone a long way for me because as soon as I start to look for more from something outside of me, I know there's something that I'm not doing. It reflects back on me. It's like, okay, what am I not doing? What are my passions am I not following? What am I getting caught up in? And it constantly helps me to try to get back into another place. They're almost like tells. If I start to look for too much from somewhere else, then I know I'm not doing something for myself.
Well, that's a good litmus test for yourself. And the other thing I tell couples, I meet a lot of couples. I've even given blessings on the beach. I'm a part minister as well as a doctor. But anyway, so I say to them, you want to save a lot of money and not have to do therapy after 30 years of marriage, like my wife and I had to do? We did, saved our marriage. We did the Imago therapy by Harville Hendricks. But here's the one question you need to ask yourself when you get triggered by your partner. Very simple. You get triggered. Something she says or does or doesn't do, you get this hit. And you ask yourself, oh, here's what I would say. Oh, Ken, what part of my I'm not loving that I'm blaming Judy for? It's got nothing to do with Judy. It's me. And when you can take back, that's bitter pill sometimes to swallow, because most people say, I wouldn't do that. You do. If you're getting
Mhm.
triggered one way or the other, you're doing it unconsciously. And we laugh now. There's a lot more space in the relationship, a lot less talking too. A
Yeah.
lot
When
less of this stuff. You said,
I
you did,
I think of all of that stuff like just resonance. It's like, if you're not in tune with it on some level, it's not going to vibrate for you. You're not going to feel it. Otherwise, stuff happens. And I remember doing this once and I was really ticked off about something. This is like years back. And there was a person I was working with at the time, this really tough older lady who was like, could love you like a mom and also could be straight talk with you and swear like a trucker if she wanted to. But I remember saying something to her and she's like, well, why did that bother you so much? And she goes, if it was around, like I did martial arts for a long time. And she goes, if someone said, okay, well, you didn't know how to do martial arts or something like this, would that have bugged you? I said, no, I'd probably laugh at about it. She goes, why? Because I just know it's BS. She's like, okay, so then what part of you bought into that?
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, good
it's
point.
true.
Good point. And it was totally true because you realize your own chinks in your armor on where your soft spots are when that stuff comes up. So
Yeah, yeah, we all get pincushioned at times, and it's all because of the mother, father, teacher, preacher culture. We didn't come in with that. We were taught that. Anytime you get triggered, it's something that's happened in your past by an authority figure, usually. Usually your
yeah.
parents. They meant well. And then you get to the point you realize, you know what? My mama and my papa did the best they could with what they knew at the time they were raising me. No need to blame my parents for what happened to me in my life. And people do that. They stay stuck the whole life. Oh, my mother was an alcoholic. My father ran away, and they carry the wound into the future.
Yeah.
This podcast is going to hit a lot of people. I got news for you. There's a lot of good information in this podcast
Yeah,
beyond the story of second chances.
we covered a lot of pieces in there, but I think they all tie back into second chances because I think a lot of times that's the catalyst for a lot of what we're talking about in many ways.
Well, as I say, it's second chances. We've all had more than one. Just be aware when they come to be thankful for them. And you said something before. Nothing happens really to us, okay? It happens for us. I believe what Eckhart Tolle said. Every tragedy and trauma that you go through in your life is the soul's way of getting your attention. Sometimes the soul will start with a little whisper, and then sometimes with a big shout. And I think some of those calamities that happen at times, there was another author in the book. Actually, I dedicated the book to her. She was the vice president of a university, a college university in Pennsylvania. I met her in the last year of her life. His name is Karen. What a beautiful soul. She was the first one who gave me the story for the book, but she had glioblastoma, brain tumors. I worked with her for 1 year, and at the end of a year, the tumors had dissipated. They disappeared. And then they came back with a vengeance. But she didn't curse her life. She said, this was the best year of my life. She said, cancer was the greatest gift that the universe, God, gave to me to wake me up. She went into the other world conscious. And it's such a moving story. What a sweet, sweet, sweet being. And she was beautiful inside and out. And that's how she reframed it for herself. She wasn't saying, why me, poor me, how come me? No, it was the best year of. So she had a healing. She had a second chance.
Wow. Ken, any final words before we finish up for the audience in relation to your experience with the book and how that might land for people back at home going through their own challenges and turmoils?
Well, this book, as I said, is a supermarket for the world. There's something in this book to help everyone. And I would hope people would read it, get something out of it, and share it with their families and friends. Everyone reading this book will know someone who needs to read this book. They'll know someone else. I've already had people say, "Oh, I'm giving it to my sister. I'm giving it to my father. I'm giving," they got something for themselves, but some of the stories, there are three people in the book who recovered from addiction, heroin addiction, cocaine addiction, uh, the worst, in and out of rehabs. One guy was in and out of rehab 6 times. So he called himself the comeback kid. Took him 6 times to get clean. And the stories are just incredible. I took him to the airport to send him to a spiritual community. This fella, he was my patient. And I hugged him and I thought he was going out to get help. He left the airport the day I left and he went in the city and got high. And I called his mother the next day. I said, Did Michael arrive safely? She said, Ken, he left the airport after you left. It took him 2 more years, but he finally got to the community. He lived there for 15 years and he's clean and clear. So I'm
Wow.
laughing. You just never know. You just never know how things are going to work out. In God's own time, I would say. We have our agenda and our time. He needed to suffer a little more. By the way, pain is universal, but suffering is optional.
Mhm.
I'm going to say that. Carolyn May said this, and I got upset when she said, but it's true. We all experience pain in our life. You cannot go through the trip, physical, emotional, or spiritual. But if you want to suffer, that's up to you. How long do you want to stay sucking your thumb? And grief, everybody has a different timetable on it. Some people will grieve a loss of a loved one for a week. Some will be 20 years later. I always think of the old Italian ladies in Italy down by the water on the scrub boats with all black dresses on, and their husband died 30 years ago, and they're still lamenting. That's a waste of life, as far as I'm concerned. That's my judgment around that. It's sad. So we're not here to be stuck. We're here to be in flow. We're here to be fluid. And again, when you don't know what to do in a situation, just be thankful.
Ken, where can people learn more about this book? Where can they learn more about the work that you do? Where's the best place to send people?
Well, the best place is go to my website, and it's the full word doctor, Doctor, because there's so many Ken Harrises out there. So there are a lot of Dr. Ken Harrises. So the full word doctor, kenharris.com. I've been podcasted all over the country. I have 2.5 years of archived newsletters. I got about 100 different podcasts that they can listen to. They can buy the book on my website if they so desire, if they want a quote, a signed copy of the author. But if they don't want to do that, they can buy it on Amazon. It's in print and Kindle form.
All of those will be in the show notes, so you can check that stuff out. Ken, what a pleasure. Thank you so much again for joining us on the podcast, and I'm sure we will talk again soon.
Well, we're gonna have to do another one because I missed your wife today.
I
So
know, I know.
yeah,
She
but yeah,
misses you too.
all right. So we'll definitely have another one. But when you stop the recording, stay on. I want to talk to you a little more. So,
Okay.
okay. Bye.